Hello to all of you, and again, it's believe it or not, very, very late here. It's 1 a.m. in the morning in Shanghai, and so, like I said to you last week, I would really appreciate lots of questions and keeping us entertained here. I'm sitting here with Dr. Dolf de Roos, and for those of you who don't know, he's also in Shanghai with me, and I can see, hang on, I just want to make myself the presenter. For some reason, it's showing someone else. You should be able to see my screen now. Can we just confirm that everyone can see my screen and that you should be able to see the kind of the main screen coming up that just says welcome? Okay, great. So thanks, Tom, for letting us know. So yeah, anyway, so I was just saying, Dolph's sitting right next to me. So if any of you think that doing business, technology, China, globalization, crowdfunding, or really making it in life is easy, I think you can think again because what have we been up since 7 a.m. this morning?
7 a.m. We rushed through breakfast. We didn't really have time. We raced down to get to the office for a meeting. Inadvertently, we got on the correct subway train, but we went in the wrong direction.
I take full responsibility for it. My Mandarin reading is not very good, so I didn't make a hell of a. It's not like the Piccadilly line and the bloody Northern line or
Right.
something.
And it's not as if my Mandarin was any better to correct it. But anyway, we got out of the station because we knew how many stops we had to get off. We thought, none of this looks familiar. And eventually we realized we're in the wrong place. Anyway, we turned back. We got to the office on time. We've been in back-to-back meetings. In fact, we just finished a meeting about half an hour ago that went on from 7 p.m. till half past midnight. And now we're doing this. It's been non-stop. We haven't.
You've been kind to us at 7 p.m., dude. We started at 3 p.m.
Oh,
and it went till nearly midnight. So
yeah, we skipped lunch, just for the record. Never had lunch. Hardly had breakfast. Skipped lunch, and then we had some takeout food that was delivered at about, what was it, 9:30 or something.
yeah,
So anyway,
that's
it's all part of the fun.
just put some bit of context to it. So if you want to ask lots of questions that keep us awake, we'd appreciate it because it's 1 a.m. in the morning here. But just to give you a little bit of context, if you're not sure who Dr. Dolf de Roos is, I could talk for a long time about him, but he's had let me rephrase that. Others like Tony Robbins, Robert Kiyosaki, Donald Trump have had the privilege of working with him, and really what amazes me is you've spoken on all their different stages. You've been part of their universities. I mean, I've got huge admiration for Tony Robbins. You've done wealth mastery and done the wealth part and the real estate part, but the book that's actually in the top right corner here is Real Estate Riches, and I had the privilege of reading that back, I think it was when I was 19, it was certainly 19 or 20. And the biggest takeaway I always remember it is get property and create value out of the property. So I mean we really did that. I mean myself and my best friend went and bought a house and it was a piece of land and we got planning and zoning for that. We turned it into, we could have actually done 34 apartments, but anyway, long story short, there was, so we did it into 6 townhouses, and then in London we turned a 3-bedroom into a 5-bedroom. So for me it's a real honor. 20 years, but embarrassing enough for me, but it's like 20 years later, plus minus, to be sitting here, face to face and discussing this stuff. And I think really from the perspective of just giving anyone some perspective, if you haven't read Real Estate Riches, I don't really care what stage of your investing career you're in, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. There's a huge amount of value in there. You talk a lot about it being a why-to book versus a how-to book. Do you want us to explain that a little bit?
Yes, I would say that all my other books on real estate are how-to books. In fact, most other books on real estate in general are how-to books. And this one is different for one particular reason. It is not so much a how-to book, but a why-to book. Because there's a theory that if you understand the why, the how always resolves itself. And I'm amazed at how many letters and emails and faxes, well, not faxes so much anymore, but we get from people who say, listen, I've been a real estate agent for 17 years. I could never understand why my investor clients bought property. I was happy that they did because I made a commission. But now I've read Real Estate Riches, and now I understand why they did it, and it's changed me because in addition to staying as being a real estate agent, I've become an investor as well. I'm no longer focused on the 3% commission so much as the 97% that you can make and hold and have increase in value and earn revenue from forevermore. So it's changed so many people's attitudes towards real estate, even people who've been in the industry for decades, that's how I've sort of come to the conclusion this fundamentally changes the way we look at real estate, which was part of the intent in the beginning, of course.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, you've been a professor of real estate at a university in America. You're one of only 2 people that have been endorsed by the NAR in terms of training. Now, that's the National Association of Realtors in America, which is quite a big deal, in terms of that. But the one that always amazed me, and the one that I'm grateful to have you as a business partner, is that when I read that book 20 plus years ago, you were already talking international. You've lived in six different countries. You speak six different languages. But I don't know those exact stats. But I do know one thing. Many years ago, you were investing internationally in multiple countries. Now it's kind of more of a sexy thing, and a lot more people are talking about it and doing it. But 20 years ago, I mean, it was unheard of.
It was unheard of. And when I look back, I even am a little amazed myself at how difficult it was, because now we have a smartphone and you can travel to another country with a smartphone from just about any home country that you happen to live in, and it works overseas. You can make phone calls. Well, that never used to be the case. It used to be the case that if you traveled overseas, even if you had a modern thing called a cell phone and you had a SIM card from your home country, it either wouldn't work, you had to get a new local SIM card, or you had to get special dispensation to make it work. And it was incredibly expensive. It was like $3 or $4 a minute to make a call. It was just difficult. I mean, I remember before we had Wi-Fi hotspots everywhere around the world, we used to plug into a phone line and we dialed up through networks like CompuServe and AOL, and you used to get that modem sound. You probably remember going through.
It's a bit like what we got in Shanghai at the moment.
Yes. Oh my gosh, talk about connections. It is stepping back in time, but it's also incredibly fascinating. And then you'd hook up on this really slow phone line connection, and of course, if the phone went or someone needed to call out or something, it was mayhem. It was really difficult. So being global back then was a lot more, I would say, intriguing, a lot more exciting. It was rarer. People didn't fly much. You used to dress up to fly, and there weren't all the flights that we've got crisscrossing the globe in all directions nowadays. So it was certainly more difficult. Possibly the rewards were greater because of it, the personal rewards of being in an exotic place. But what happened since then is the globalization of the world has become so prevalent. It's so easy to travel now that there's almost no excuse not to be global. And I am stunned and astounded, especially in some countries in the West in particular, and I'm picking on the United States here. They have an incredibly low propensity to travel. Something like 17% of the American population has a passport, which I think is sort of the wrong way of looking at it. It's more like 83% of the population don't have a passport. Only 5% leave the country in any one year. And if you ask Americans, how many of you, if you've got an audience of 100 or 1,000 people, how many of you have all of your eggs, all of your investment eggs denominated in US dollars and invested in the US, just about every hand goes up. The concept of investing overseas is kind of foreign to them. Whereas if you take a country like South Africa, for reasons that you probably don't want me to go into, because you don't want to have me remind you of the dire situation of the falling rand, and having said I shouldn't mention it, I just did. But you've got a great motivation to invest overseas, which maybe is good in the long run, because those of you who have made the step and invested overseas, you've made yourselves immune from further falls in the rand, at least on that proportion of your net worth that you took overseas. But other countries around the world have these different propensities. And one of the great things about traveling is you can see what motivates people, and you start to see commonalities. And I'm telling you, Scott, the more you invest overseas and in your travels you monitor them and look for new deals, the more you realize how smart it is. And the only thing you curse yourself about is that you didn't start earlier.
Yeah. No, look, I think 100%. So what I did is we've got a lot of people online tonight, and I ask if everyone can send through questions or anything they want to know. I've known Dolf for a long time now, so I put together some questions that I think people would like to know. I also asked some people, and I know that our asset managers also put some questions together. But I want to run through some questions that I think that people would be interested in, and then hopefully others can jump in and get going. So the one that I'm always fascinated by, and you do a psychology of wealth. I've listened to it. You take people to Lake Como, and I know it costs them something like $50,000 for a week with you. And the one that I enjoy most, and this is Necker Island with Richard Branson's island, which I thought was a pretty good image for someone wealthy. But it's you've done this research before on what the wealthy have in common. And again, I love you, and I know the answer, but I love it when you share it with people, because I think a lot of people think that they can't have it. And anyway,
well, it's true, because I came from a family that believed very fervently that if you want to do well in life, you have to study hard and get a degree. So without thinking, when I finished high school, off I went to university. And I was horrified in my first week at university, looking around at the people with the degrees, the professors, the tutors, and the lecturers, that it occurred to me they didn't seem to be very wealthy at all. They had very shabby clothes, if you like. They had very small cars and very modest homes. And I thought there's something wrong with this equation that degrees equates to wealth. So I took it upon myself at the tender age of 17 to make a study of the rich. I wanted to know, what is it that the rich have in common? thinking, perhaps somewhat naively, that if I could identify 30 or 40 things that they did have in common and emulate them, that I'd have a good shot at being rich. Well, the challenge was I could hardly find anything that the rich had in common. It certainly wasn't age. Bill Gates was a young man when he made his first billion. It wasn't gender. It wasn't religious belief. It wasn't whether you were from an immigrant family or not. It wasn't whether you were the firstborn of the family or the lastborn or anywhere in between. And it certainly had nothing to do with education. In fact, I think there's a negative correlation between education and wealth. And that's not to say that if you're a tenured professor somewhere at a fancy university on a salary of $140,000 a year, that you're not wealthy. Of course you are. But even if you're on $140,000, apart from your 3% increase that you may get that year if you're lucky, you'll never make $140 million that year. So if you look at Bill Gates, we mentioned him before, but supposedly for a long time the richest person on this planet. He's a dropout from Harvard University. Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle Computers, for a long time the second richest person on this planet, college dropout. Paul Allen, the 2IC of Microsoft, college dropout. You see a pattern there. And anyway, to get back to the study, I could only find two things that the rich had in common. And one is that almost without exception, the rich had integrity. Their word was their bond. It was their honor. Now, that's not to say that if you don't have integrity, you can't get rich. It's fair to say that members of the mafia, for instance, tend to be richer than most. However, there's this rule that if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, which means if they use devious and strange means to become rich, then they'll probably end up succumbing to that as well. That's why people who belong to organizations like the mafia tend to have a life expectancy which is shorter than that of people who do not belong to organizations like that. And back in the day when I thought that there's this correlation between integrity and wealth, I didn't know how to manifest it. I didn't know how to put a hat on it. I didn't know how to label it and think about it. But I've since realized something which might be the most important thing I can not only teach tonight on this call, but of anything I can ever teach you, and that is that integrity is not genetic. In other words, if you're not happy with your current level of integrity, you can increase it. And to the extent that you do, I believe you'll have more money coming your way. And there's actually a reason for this. It's not hocus pocus science or whatever. There is a reason, and that is if you deal with people who have integrity, then if you exude that yourself, you will attract people with integrity. And people with integrity tend to stick to their word, and they do what they say, and you'll just have more money flowing to you. But anyway, when I was 17, I couldn't figure this one out. The only other thing that I could find that the rich had in common is that almost without exception, the rich either made their money or held their wealth in real estate. And I thought, man, if that's all it is, I can do that. So at the tender age of 17, I set upon myself the task of finding a property that I could invest in. And it wasn't easy. I had to look at a lot of them. And then when I was 17, I looked about 12, which you might think is no big deal, but try applying for a mortgage when you look like 12. I mean, I could say try going on a date with a 17-year-old girl, and she also thought you looked like 12. And even if she knew you were 17, she still didn't want to be seen by her friends with someone who looked like 12. So it wasn't easy. In fact, the first bank I gave my pitch to, he waited for me to finish, and then he said, "Are you done?" And I thought, that's a strange question, but I said yes. And he leaned forward and he said, "This is a university prank, isn't it?" He thought it was a hoax. But anyway, I could have given up and said, well, I'm obviously not cut out for this real estate game, and given up there and then, but I didn't. I persevered. I went to bank after bank after bank and honed my ability to give a semi-plausible presentation as to why the bank should fund this property. And eventually I got a bank to say, okay, I'll take a chance on you. And anyway, the rest is history, because at the end of that first month, the rental I'd collected was more money than that month's allocation of mortgage payment and insurance and maintenance and property taxes and all the other expenses. And I thought to myself, I have made a profit and I haven't put in any hours of work. It's like money for nothing. It's money while you sleep, or beach money, as a friend of mine calls it. And I thought, I've got to do this again. So I did. I did it again and then again and again. And I spent 4 years getting a bachelor's degree, an honors bachelor's degree. And the university came to me and said, Dolf, it's 4 years for an honors bachelor's degree. It's only 1 more year for a master's. Why don't you do it? And I said, because, and then I hesitated because I didn't actually have an answer. So I said, okay. And halfway through that, they said, you're doing so well, why don't you switch to doing a PhD? And I said, because, and again, I didn't have an answer. So I did that. I spent 8 years at university. Now, remember back to my parents who believed that to do well in life, you have to study hard and get a degree. Here I was with a PhD. Do you think they were proud? Of course they were. And they were sitting by the telephone waiting for me to announce the acceptance of a job. And I did go to 2 job interviews, and at the end of the second one, I was offered a job at $32,000 a year, which back then was a lot of money. But I remember thinking to myself, because the week before I just completed a real estate deal that netted me $35,000. I remember thinking to myself, why would anyone in his or her right mind work for 40 hours a week, 50 weeks of the year for $32 lousy $1,000 a year when you can make $35,000 in a week and take the rest of the year off? So anyway, that's a bit of a long reason as to what the rich have in common, but it's real estate. And I got this PhD in electrical engineering, never really worked a day as an engineer, never wanted to. And it wasn't a waste. I didn't, study something for 8 years that was wasted. I learned processes and ways of solving problems creatively that have stood the test of time and have served me well.
So if I move on to, so it's really interesting, in terms of what they have in common, just integrity and real estate. It's pretty interesting based on the 9-hour meeting we just had. So if I look at the question number 2, it's what can I learn from them and what can I copy? And I think probably this question probably leads in from what you've just said, because what I love about Tony Robbins and the learnings I've had from him is that most people in life try and think they've got to go and figure it all out themselves. And actually, the easiest way to mastery is actually just to copy someone who's already doing it. So, if I've understood what you've just said, you went and did all the studying of what the wealthy already have, and they only had 2 things in common, integrity and real estate. And so that's what you went and did.
Right.
And, if I've understood that lesson correctly, and for everyone online, is that what you're merely saying to people, is that they can literally, they can choose to have integrity and they can start to study and understand real estate, and then they're on track to pretty much copy what the wealthy are already doing?
Well, I feel to balance out my long-winded answer before, I have to give a short answer, so I'm just going to say yes, you're absolutely right. But, I have trouble just sticking to that. So it's true, Scott, success leaves clues. So you don't need to figure everything out for yourself. There's a saying, it's one of my favorite sayings, that experience is the best teacher. But folks, it doesn't have to be your own experience. I don't need to experience cocaine consistently to find out whether it's for me or not. I'm perfectly happy to rely on the experience of other people. And it's the same with how to make money or how to avoid losing money and all those sorts of things. And I'm not saying that if you try to do this, you'll always meet with success. But your attitude towards success will change, because when you have a win, you'll say, well, that was a successful experience. And when you have a loss or when you have a major defeat or something, instead of beating yourself up or committing suicide or saying that, you're a failure and all that, you say, well, that was a successful way of not doing it. In fact, it reminds me of Thomas Edison. I should have stuck to the yes answer. It would have been a lot shorter. But I'll start with this. But Thomas Edison, he supposedly invented the light bulb. And don't think for a moment that he got a graphite fiber or a carbon fiber and put a current through and said, oh, I made a light bulb. Woohoo, lucky on first pop. He tried more than 1,000 different ways of making a light bulb. And in his own words, he didn't have 1,000 failures before he had a success. He found 1,000 successful ways not to make a light bulb, which were a necessary step on the path to finding the one successful way of making a light bulb.
Sounds a bit like doing a global real estate crowdfunding site. With some of the challenges involved in that.
It's a lot of trial and error.
So, this is obviously a kind of a massive question, and I sometimes get this even in South Africa or China, and they say to me, where's the best place to invest? And it's kind of, how long is this piece of string? Because,
right.
But just at a simple level, with all your global experience, if you were to take some of the better markets, to invest in at the moment, where do you think it is? What do you think?
Oh gosh, that is a complex question. I don't want to be facetious, but I want to stylize it
we
by
could run
saying,
an entire webinar just on this.
No, I'm going to keep it brief. But the best markets to invest in are the markets where the population growth in the moment is the strongest. Folks, there is this incredibly strong correlation between population growth and growth in real estate capital values. And proof of that is Japan. And I love Japan. I had the privilege of learning the language as a kid. I spent a lot of time over there for a long time. I went there every 8 weeks. Culturally, I feel in tune with what's going on there. But the challenge with the market in Japan, the real estate market, is that their population is shrinking. It's currently just under 130 million. And there are predictions that within a generation, the population will fall below 100 million. Obviously, there are a lot of elderly people in Japan. The birth rate is extraordinarily low. Now, a falling population is good for things like pollution. It's going to decrease pollution. It's going to decrease congestion on the roads. It's just not good for real estate values, because real estate is one of those many markets that works on the balance between supply and demand. And when demand is falling long term because of this population decline, then the prices are going to drop off. Conversely, where extraordinarily fast. You've got major increases in population. Now, we all know that the population of China, I haven't counted them, but they're about 1.4 billion. In fact, I don't know whether anyone has really counted them. But that's what the estimate is. The growth is rather low here because they've had this one child per couple policy for a long time. In fact, it's going to backfire on them because the population here is graying as well, as we heard the other day, Scott, and they think that the population could actually drop off here. But having said that, both Shanghai, where we are today, and Beijing, where we were a couple of days ago, they have had phenomenal growths in capital values, something between 30 and 40% in the last 18 months, And you've got population growth, you'll get capital value growth, and we also just said that the population is pretty static. It's because of China's 1.4 billion people, a disproportionately large number of them are leaving rural areas and going to the cities, and the bigger the city, the more popular they are. So the two most popular cities in China, as I understand it, are Beijing and Shanghai. That's why the population's been increasing there, and that's why, real estate values have gone through the roof.
So it happens at 1 a.m. in the morning.
Yes, it happens. I thought, what topic am I talking about again? So in the United States, you know, the cities with high capital value are the ones that have had high growth coupled with a limited supply of property. Like San Francisco, you can't expand to the west very far because you hit the Pacific Ocean, and you've got the Bay Area and that you can't contend with. And Las Vegas has also got a landlocked situation where it's surrounded by BLM, which is Bureau of Land Management land, and Indian reservation land. So it's got a limited supply of land. Prices tend to go up faster there than in comparable cities that don't have that limitation. And then you've got cities like Dallas. There's a massive surge in the population in Dallas, way greater than the increase in population overall for the United States. And there are many reasons for that. We could spend a whole hour describing why that is the case. But we don't even need to know why. All I need to know is, where is the population growing? So, Scott, we could go to a country tomorrow that we've never been to before, neither of us, and nor have we done any research there. And within half an hour, I'll know exactly which city is the most likely city to offer us good real estate investment returns. And not only which cities, but which suburbs within those cities, and even down at the suburb level, which cluster of houses. This is such easy research to do. It's one of the many ways of beating the average in a way that I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, believe you cannot do in any other market. Not the stock market, not the commodities market, not the share market, the futures market, the options market, nothing.
It's really interesting, because I remember many years ago you taught Henny that when we were in, I think we were in Phoenix actually. It's either Phoenix or Atlanta, I can't remember. And, you know, Henny, with a lot of his experience as well, really kind of took that to heart. And I know that you and him use it a lot now in a lot of our due diligence and the different projects. And I know it's, you know, it's one of the very important functions that we look in based on the GIDS thing, because it's one of the, you know, important principles within the GIDS context. So, and just in my interest, one last thing on the population growth side. You know, when you take, I mean, we went on that bullet train just the other day, and I mean, we went past all those cities where there are just massive high-rises all over the place. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal. And if you haven't been to China, like, I highly, highly recommend that you do go to China. I do actually have a survey up. I'd appreciate it if you fill in the survey. It's always good to know what different people are thinking and where they invest and what their kind of, you know, what their focus areas are. But I think the last thing I wanted to say to you, Dolf, you know, with your experience between emerging markets and kind of the first world, you know, what are the benefits, pros and cons, and then also tying that into diversification, because as an example, you had a lot of property in Christchurch, and then it had an earthquake, and that's no fault of your own, but if that was your only portfolio in the whole world, like, you know, and so people often, you know, it's, you've got emerging world, you've got first world, and then the thought of like having all my property in the suburb I'm in makes a lot more sense to me technically, because I can walk down the street and go and do my, you know, my management on my own or something.
Right.
Or I can think globally and diversify and kind of look at different markets between emerging and global.
Well, that's just opened up a whole can of worms, because if you like the idea of having properties in your suburbs so that you can walk down the road to manage them, Scott, you shouldn't be managing them yourself anyway, because there's a limit to the number of properties you can manage. And for most people, you'd probably max out at 20 or 25 or certainly 30 properties. Rather than manage the 30 properties you already own, you should have managers in place to do that for you for a relatively modest fee, and you can devote that time that you free up that you'd otherwise spend managing looking for the next 30 to buy. So that's at one level. You know, financial planners talk about diversification, and they, of course, mean you should have a little bit in the share market and a little bit in mutual funds and a little bit in the stock, well, whatever, the commodities market. It goes on and on. I believe in diversification, but I believe in diversification within the real estate market. And by of residential, a little bit of commercial, a little bit of industrial, and maybe a bit of hospitality. Have a little bit where you live, even if it is South Africa. Have a little bit in England, have a little bit in the United States, have a little bit in Europe, and a little bit in other places. And then you've got a spread of risk, because you're absolutely right. That earthquake was devastating in Christchurch, which is a city of about 1/3 people. Something like 1,600 commercial buildings came down and 15,000 homes. I mean, it was massive. And then you might say, well, surely you were insured. And of course I was insured. In fact, there are two levels of insurance, Scott. One is indemnity insurance, and the other one is full replacement cover. So I had full replacement cover, and every year, year after year, I paid the premiums for full replacement cover. So I thought I was completely covered. But it takes a calamity like an earthquake, and it takes an earthquake happening to your buildings rather than someone that you read about in the newspaper to find out just how insurance companies work. So I'd file claims, and I'd say, all right, I had this building taken down. I'm ready for my insurance payout. Well, I should add, before that, within 2 weeks, they came to me and said, Dolf, we will offer you a check right now for 46% of what you're covered for if you accept the check right now. And I said, I'm so sorry. I never realized I only paid 46% of the premiums. And they said, no, you paid the full premiums. And I said, well, then pay me the full amount. They said, you don't get it, do you? I said, apparently not. Try explaining it again. They said, well, we'll pay you 46% if you'll accept a check right now. What they're basically saying is they're bullying you, because if you accept that money now as a full and final settlement, then they don't have to pay you more. But if you want more, you're going to have to wait for it. And, you know, it became a catch cry in Christchurch that the insurance companies worked along the 3 Ds: defer, deny, and delay. And then eventually the claimants will either die, or they'll get annoyed, or they'll get desperate for money. So even if you're insured, it's not a complete coverage. So you're absolutely right, Scott. When you've got geographical diversification and sector diversification, you are largely immune from any one calamity that might befall a particular market sector.
Well, Peter Diamandis talks a lot about how the insurance industry is prime for crowdfunding, and I look forward to the day when they disappear for reasons exactly like that. So Justino basically has said, yeah, if you had R1 million to invest, how would you invest this money? I'm not going to answer that right now. Dolf and I can answer that now as we go through this, but we've definitely got the answers coming. So
can I give an insight? If I had R1 million, what I'd do right now?
Yeah, to be honest.
Convert it.
It's quite ironic because we've got Rand and Yuan up on the screen as a picture. But from your side, is it better to invest in residential or commercial?
Oh gosh, that's a loaded question. I gave you just the one-word answer I could. The answer is commercial. But if I left it at that, we might get people who are listening to the call who are perhaps embarking on their first real estate investment to buy commercial when perhaps they should learn with residential. Listen, it is far easier for most beginners to start with residential for a lot of obvious reasons. If you look at a house and you inspect this house and there's no front door, you're probably going to say, hey, there's something wrong with this house. It needs a front door. But most of us, when we first look at a commercial property, we can look at it, but we don't know what might be missing. We don't know what is expected of a commercial building. So it's a lot tougher in the beginning phases to get started in commercial, but not that much tougher. It's all common sense. And once you understand how good commercial property is, your desire to look at many residential properties tends to go by the wayside. And listen, I know we've got limited time. I run a 3-day event where I speak basically for 3 days non-stop. I know it sounds impossible, but maybe now that you've heard me this long, you think it's not that impossible. And so it's hard to condense and answer residential or commercial into one sentence. But just to give you some insights, with residential property, the tenant might pay you rent, but you, the landlord, have to pay the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. But with most commercial leases, they're known as triple net, which means they're net of property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, which means that you collect the rent and the tenant pays those outgoings, so your net returns are higher, if you like. Also, the tenant earns their income on the property. That means they have a vested interest in keeping it looking good. So they'll ask you permission to paint it and to put a new roof on and do all kinds of things that I've never had asked when it comes to residential property. And they're just two of the reasons. There are actually dozens of them. So, and here's another insight to round it off with. When I think of all the people I know that are fabulously rich through real estate, and by that I mean more than, say, $100 million US, only one of them has achieved that with residential property. The rest have all, without fail, done it with commercial property. That's a good enough indicator for me that if you really want to go big in real estate, go the commercial route.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's pretty relevant, basically. So, guys, I'm putting up surveys and stuff. You know, the more you interact, the more it's good for all of us, because we can get some insight into what you are wanting, and also just your level and which areas, and then obviously from Dolf and I's perspective we can answer more thoroughly. So if I ask you, over the last 5 years that you've been involved in real estate, I'm being kind, but the last couple of decades that you've been involved in real estate, and again,
you're still being kind,
and globally and in many different countries, you've seen some quite significant changes. And I know at the moment you're talking quite a lot around the world about one of the biggest changes that you've been seeing globally. What are just some of those changes, and significantly at the moment, what is a change that everyone really needs to understand?
Well, Scott, it's really stark and it's very significant, because I always say that, as you've heard, I've spent 8 years at university getting a PhD in electrical engineering. Some of you will know that that's not the easiest course around. That's pretty hardcore. And yet everything I learned during those 8 years of electrical engineering has been made redundant by new technology. We learned the operating characteristics of valves, and I'm not talking about faucet or tap type valves, but valve radio type valves, and then transistors and integrated circuits and ASICs, application specific integrated circuits, on and on. It's all been made redundant by new technology. I got my bachelor's degree before the PC was invented, right? Whereas I always say that when you compare that with real estate, nothing in real estate has changed in the last century. A mortgage is still a mortgage, collateral is still collateral, and equity is still equity. And if you don't know the difference between collateral and equity, you better find out. But you can find out 80% of all you need to know in real estate in about a week, or if you're slow, in a couple of weeks, whereas 8 years wasn't enough to learn all there was to know about electrical engineering. I just learned about one very narrow little branch. So I've always said that real estate doesn't change. You learn it in 2 weeks and you're set for life to have this crank handle that generates income. But there's been one massive change that's come along relatively recently, and it is changing the face of real estate. Some of you have heard about it already. In fact, if you're on this call, the chances are likely that you've already heard about it. But the masses have not yet heard about it. It is my prediction that over the next 2 to 3 years, the masses will hear about it. Word is starting to creep out, and I'm talking, of course, about crowdfunding. It sounds like a bit of a buzzword. It sounds like a hippie commune, flower power concept or whatever, or maybe those words are a bit old-fashioned, but you know what I mean. It's just, what is crowdfunding? That sounds a bit weird, but when you study it for even 10 minutes, you go online and just find out what crowdfunding actually is and why it's happening now, and then suddenly you realize that it is going to change the face of real estate. Crowdfunding is not new, by the way. An example we always use when I think both of us, when we speak around the world, is we talk about the Statue of Liberty, which not many people outside of the States know was a gift from France to the United States. And it was going to be given to the city of New York, but it was only the statue, not the pedestal on which it was built. And they needed about $2.1 million to build this pedestal. And without the pedestal, they couldn't accept the gift. So there were other cities like Chicago and Philadelphia that actually put in bids to accept the Statue of Liberty on the basis that they would absolutely pay for the pedestal. And there was a project that was undertaken by the newspaper magnate, I forget his name right now, but anyway, he ran a campaign in his newspaper to say, Pulitzer, the one from Pulitzer Prize, absolutely. And they raised the money that way. It was the first example of crowdfunding. But it hasn't been very easy to do with all the regulations we have around the world. We have a body known as the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission. In other countries, it's called other thing, the MAS in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and ASIC in Australia, and all that sort of thing. And they've got good intent, but they've basically put the brakes on people being able to crowdfund. And then a couple of interesting things happened, Scott, and I'll pick up the pace, but Kickstarter came along. If you had a technological project, you could advertise it on Kickstarter. Money was raised this way. No SEC regulations. There was no fraud. And government started saying, gosh, we should ease up on these restrictions for financial instruments. So around the world.
I mean, if you think Paul Nadera, who's one of our partners and runs our Australian office, he was part of ASOP, and they raised, for 300 companies, they raised just short of $150 million in Australia, which is one of the tightest regulatory in the world,
right?
And they didn't have one run-in with ASIC. They didn't have one fraud complaint,
right?
So when these financial industries and whatever tell you, oh, it's got fraud and it's cheating, whatever, the track record's actually very different.
It is. So everyone started saying, let's get rid of these regulations, and there's almost a race going on around the world. In fact, Malaysia became the first country in the world last year on February the 12th to get rid of this requirement that investors be accredited. Even this notion of being accredited, that you have to have net assets of $1 million excluding your home and an income of $100,000 for an individual or $200,000 for a couple. What a bizarre rule. If you want to put $10,000 into something and you've got $10,000, you should be able to do that whether you're supposedly accredited or not. So governments have kind of come to their senses, and as we go along, these rules are being dropped. In fact, another phase of rules is being dropped next week in the United States, which will be a massive milestone. And it's happening in, I believe, 26 Western nations where they're getting rid of these silly, archaic rules. And it's enabling crowdfunding to surge ahead in a way that just hasn't been possible for the last few decades. So it's my prediction, Scott, to get back to your question, that this is going to cause a fundamental change, not only in the way money is invested, but in the number of people that even can invest in real estate. We always have these benchmarks that investing in real estate is only available to approximately 12.5% of the population. 1 person in 8, roughly, is able to invest in real estate. Because when you think about it, to buy a house, let's say there's a house of $100,000 US dollars or whatever equivalent currency in another country, you need a down payment of $30,000 to $40,000. That's not available to many people. But crowdfunding essentially enables people to pool their money. So now if we get the entry price low enough, we might come back to that a bit later as to how we're managing to get our entry price low. If you can get the entry price to $10,000, you open it up to a lot more people. If the entry price is only $1,000, then even more people can come along and participate in crowdfunding. And even if you do have 100,000, Scott, instead of being restricted to buying just one house in one city in one country, you could now choose to put $10,000 into each of 10 houses, which might be in 10 different countries or 10 different regions. So it's fundamentally changing the way real estate is being transacted. It's, I think, one of the most exciting things we've seen in real estate in decades.
Yeah, you know, it's just to give people stats. In the 1940s, the average share was held for 8 years, and today it's only held for 6 seconds. And you know, I'm talking on the stock market. And when you take real estate, the average property is held at the moment for 7 or 8 years, particularly in the US. And I think that in the same way, technology is going to have the same impact to the space. So, you know, the one thing I do say is that technology coming to any space is not a fix-all. You know, it's not guaranteed. And you know, we talk a lot about the fundamentals of investing and how important it is. And what concerns me is that in the technology space, a lot of people are coming in, they're saying, oh, you know, here's a new website, here's a bunch of property, but there are risks. And, you know, my question to you is, how do people manage those risks? You know, how do you know, just because it looks got a pretty picture on a website doesn't necessarily mean it's good investment.
That is true. And one of the challenges with just websites is that anyone can throw up a website and make it look pretty good. You get 10-year-old kids now who are better than I am at putting up a website. So the fact that someone's got a property on a website of itself is not a sufficiently good reason to buy that property. But there are 2 things that are really important here, Scott. One is social proofing. And to give the analogy that I think I first learned from you, although it's also self-explanatory, is that when you first go onto eBay and you want to buy something and it costs, say, $600, you think, holy smokes, am I really going to send $600 to a complete stranger? How will I know that he'll even send me the goods? Well, the answer is you can see that he's done, I'm making this up, 328 transactions, and he's got a 99.7% approval rating, so the chances are that he's actually going to deliver on that. So that's the first thing. With crowdfunding, you can get a lot of social proofing. But the other thing is that crowdfunding doesn't only refer to how you pull the monetary resources together, it can also refer to how you can do the due diligence. Now, due diligence sounds like alliteration or someone with a bit of a stutter, but it's actually meaning that you do the analysis of a project, in our case, a real estate deal, to find out if it's worth investing in or not. And it's called due diligence. And what happens is when it's crowdfunded, you can have all your due diligence on the website that the crowdfunding platform is hosted on. Now, not everyone reveals their due diligence. Some may think that they want to keep it secret, but we've got this policy of wanting everyone to know exactly how we come to this conclusion. So you can do the due diligence based on stats of the suburb. What kind of schools are there? What are the average you know, SAT scores or school scores of schools in that region? What's the actual pricing? What are the crime rates? How many jobs are there in the facility? What's the average commute time? And then you can get stats on houses. What have been the increases in prices over the last 30 or 40 years? Has it been consistent? What's been the standard deviation of the change in prices? So you manage risk, again, by going to the crowd. It's a new phenomenon that the more you delve into it and read about it, the more you realize, wow, this is here to stay and it's really good.
I love it. I mean, even in China here last night, we got a taxi with a lady driver driving us home at 11 o'clock at night. And I mean, how does she manage risk? You know, there's no way she could have done it before the likes of Uber. But now, because we're using, to be fair, it's not Uber, it's a system called Didi. It's the Didi in China. But the point being is that she knows that we're not necessarily going to hurt her as a bunch of men jumping into a car. because technology provides that safety.
Right.
You know, and that's just sort of like,
yeah.
you know,
She can track who we are, and
exactly.
we can always track who she is. If she takes us for a ride to, you know, longer ride than necessary to get there, we can see that on a map.
No, 100%. So let's look at this seventh question here, and for me, it's the one that I always enjoy. You know, with $20, you increase the value of a building by $2 million, and you know, at the end of the day, ironically, you know, one of the most important things in real estate is always looking for how you can add capital value to a building. You know, you don't want to wait necessarily to just ride out the market and make money. So it's always looking for twists, like you taught me back when I was 19. So that's probably the best I've heard, $20 into $2 million.
Well, the question doesn't set it up very well, to be honest, Scott. You've got to add one little bit here. How to turn 20 million into 2 million overnight. I mean, if you give me 20 years to do this, anyone could turn $20 into 2 million over a 20-year period. When I mention this to people, you know, we turn $20 to 2 million, you can sort of see their eyes rolling, either literally or they'd like to if they knew they wouldn't be caught doing it. And they think, yeah, likely story, but share it anyway, and we'll see how close to the truth it is. But I'm going to share it with you right now, and you tell me whether you think it's real or not. So you've got to understand the scene. It's in Jakarta, Indonesia. Jakarta is a massive city. Indonesia, by the way, is the most populous nation in the southern hemisphere, 250 million people. Jakarta has a nighttime population of 5 million people and a daytime population of 10 million people. That means every morning, 5 million people commute into town, and every evening 5 million commute out. And if you haven't been there, you have no idea of the chaos and just how congested the streets are. It makes Shanghai looks like a little country town with plenty of space to move. So it gets pretty congested there. So we had a commercial building, and near the CBD or the downtown area, although it's hard to know where the downtown area is in Jakarta, it's so big. But we had a commercial building there of about 100,000 square feet, 10,000 square meters roughly. And it was a 10-story building. And any of the directors working in that building, if they needed to get to the airport, the drive to the airport was about 45 minutes, assuming there's no traffic. But with this massive traffic there, the drive can take anywhere from 3 hours to 5 hours. You have no idea. Sometimes you're crawling along so slow that it would be faster to walk. And you might say, well, why don't you walk? The exercise will do you good. Well, the footpaths and sidewalks and pavements, whatever you want to call them, are so crowded with people that you're jostling for space there. It's just easier to sit in the car, even though it's only going at half a mile an hour. So it takes 3 to 5 hours. That means if the director has a flight leaving at, say, 3 p.m., he can't go to the office in the morning because he may not get to the airport. So how did we spend the $20? Well, we spent $18 of it on a pail of white paint and the remaining $2 on a brush. And we went out on the roof of this building. It happened to be a flat concrete roof. And we painted this big round circle. And in the middle, we painted the letter H. And some of you have already figured out that what we effectively did is we put a helipad on the roof of this building. Now, in all seriousness, to be able to land a helicopter on the building, you have to get what's known as Civil Aviation Authority approval, and that took a couple of dinners as well. Some of you know how it goes in Indonesia. But anyway, we had a helipad there. And now these directors could be flown from their building to the airport in 15 to 20 minutes. So the rental value went up by about $2 a foot. If before we were charging about $14 a foot, we now got $16 a foot because you could now have a flight to the airport. So $2 a foot increase over 100,000 square feet is a $200,000 a year increase in rental. And when you cap that out at 10%, there's your 2 million lift in value overnight, folks. This is as real gets. So you can do these things. And the thing I love about real estate is you can absolutely do these things with real estate in a way that you can never even dream to do them with any other asset class. If you spent, $10 million buying a $10 million portfolio on the stock market, there's nothing you can do by spending $20 to increase the value by another 2 million. And with real estate, you can. So anyway, that's sort of how it goes.
So just basically in simple terms, we got a question here from Kevin, and I think it's pretty pertinent. I know most people want to know it. How do you actually buy your first property with no money down?
Oh, gosh, Scott, you have all these questions that are worthy of 1.5 hours each, and you want to do the whole thing in this time. Listen, there are many ways of doing it. When we say no money down, you mean none of your own cash out of your pocket. So if you already own a building that you bought for $100,000 with a 50% mortgage, so you have a $50,000 mortgage and $50,000 cash, and you bought it 10 years ago and it's gone up to 200,000. So now you've got equity of 150,000, and if you're on an interest-only mortgage, you still have 50,000 of loan. Well, you want to buy another building worth the same as this one, worth 200,000. You need a 50% mortgage. You could refinance the first property. So by saying no money down, it means no cash out of your own pocket. If you have other assets, you can refinance them. If you don't have any assets that you can refinance, go and see an uncle or an aunt or an ex-girlfriend or a future boyfriend or whatever, and go and see if you can, mortgage one of their buildings. They probably will say no initially, but if you share some of the profit with them, they might warm up to the idea. So that's another idea. Here's a third way of doing it, is you buy an asset that's worth a lot more than you have to pay for it. And you might say, well, come on, Dolf, let's get realistic now. It's all very good and well to say these things, but how do you buy a building for way below its true value? Well, I'm telling you guys, every building I've bought has been bought at a price well below its true value. And by true value, I mean I could have turned around the very next day and sold it for a lot more. And you might say, that doesn't sound very likely. Why would anyone in his or her right mind buy that has a building for sale, let it go for $1 million when it's actually worth $1.5 million? Guys, I can give you dozens and dozens of reasons why that might be so, because I've experienced every version of it. A couple are divorcing and they say, well, let's just sell all our property and get rid of the proceeds. They bought it for $500,000 18 years ago, and by getting $1 million for it, they're thinking they're doubling their money when in actual fact it's worth $1.5 million. Or 4 kids are bequeathed a property and they don't know what to do with it. One says, well, let's rent it out. The second one says, no, let's turn it into a boarding house. And the third one says, no, let's turn it into a youth hostel. And the fourth one, well, they can't find him because he's kayaking in Bhutan. And eventually they just get together, including the lawyer for the one who's away, and say, let's just sell the thing quickly and split the proceeds. And they sell it for too little. It just happens.
I must admit, just from personal experience, I believe that when you're young, you've got energy and you've got time. And my first 2 properties were exactly the same. So where I could find the property and do the mortgage, et cetera, and other people brought capital to the table. And the one thing I would say is that often people from a scarcity mindset believe that if they give up 50% of the property, they're losing 50%. My philosophy in life is that 50% of something is better, a hell of a lot better than 100% of nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I know it's pretty obvious, but unfortunately, a lot of people get caught up in that. Let me answer another question here quickly. And I've moved over to the next slide, but there's some pretty good questions coming through here. So there's another one from Frank, and he said, I think that people automatically default to a negative view due to a poor mindset. What would you say is the best way to change your mindset?
Well, having a mind transplant is very difficult. The best way to change a negative mindset, and this will sound very harsh and you won't want to do it, but it is fire your negative friends. We all hang with people, and sometimes we're loyal because we've been with them for a long time. But if you hang around people long enough who just constantly and continually have this negative mindset, eventually it rubs off. If you have an imbalance anywhere between the levels of water and the hoses, it always balances out. So if you're always trying to be positive and you've got a friend who's always really negative, as sure as day follows night, to the extent that you might raise his negativity a bit with your positivity, he's going to drag your positivity down a bit. So sometimes we have to fire friends. Better than that is, give your friends some courses. You don't have to look far. There are plenty out there, a lot of really good courses. Listen, I'm the biggest student out there. The fact that I've produced a few courses isn't to say that I think mine are the only good ones here. Created courses over the years because I've absorbed so much information. I just want to get what I've learned out. It's benefited me so much. So you've got to hang with the right people. You've got to read the right books. I would say stop watching the news too much. I mean, you've got to stay informed to know what's going on in the world. But some people go to sleep after they've just watched the late night news, and the first thing they do when they wake up in the morning is watch the news, and you've all heard the stories. They don't tend to have good, soppy, happy ending stories on TV because it just doesn't sell advertising space. So it's always shocking things, killings and murders and rapes and plunder and you name it. And when you infuse your mind with that, you naturally become a bit more negative. So try and do something positive every day. Try and figure out a good way of looking at something. The same things will happen to 2 people, and one of them comes away with a negative experience and the other one comes away with a positive experience. And it's all mindset. So there are so many things you can do. There are so many great courses. Just make sure you do something. Feed your mind. Your mind is like a plant. And if you don't give it enough water, it will wither and die. And if you give it bad information, it will fester on that and ferment it. And it will make your outlook of the world a lot worse. And if you read good books and hang around people who are encouraging and uplifting and who see things in a way that you never even thought possible, then slowly but surely your attitude's going to change. And it's a funny little thing, but as your attitude changes, your circumstances change. And as your circumstances change, your opportunities change. And if you see some of those opportunities, then suddenly your life will change. And then people will say to you, how's it possible that always such good things happen? You're so lucky. And if they think it's just luck, they're missing the point. Luck is where preparation meets opportunity. Be prepared. Read the books. Find out how to do things. Go on an adventure. Try something new. Try to do something every day that you've never, ever done before. I see it here. I see tourists come over to Shanghai. And where do they go? They want to go to Starbucks and McDonald's because they know what they're going to get. Well, you might as well stay home if you're going to do that. Try something new. Try a food that looks despicable. And even if it is, just be proud that you tried it and you don't want to do it again.
Yeah. I have to say, I also often say to my wife, and I learned this from Tony Robbins again, what you focus on is what you get. You read, there's a lot of books out there, but I think one of the easiest ones is just pure gratitude as well. Right. And just having gratitude for your situation where you're at. So, I mean, just while we're on this topic, I've got a thing up there as to whether people are interested in single-family homes, 10-house packages, commercial opportunities, medical buildings. These type of things are interesting, and again, from a mindset perspective, a lot of people don't necessarily even understand like why you would do one thing, why you would do another. So there's a great question that's come up here, and I've got it up on the screen. In terms of how you get financing, I learned this again from yourself. Actually, I remember reading in your book right up, because most people that are on the webinar tonight will have, if they're not in residential, it's because the bank won't lend the money. If they're not in commercial, it's because someone won't lend the money, whether it's for the 30-40% deposit or for the, for the bank funding. You've got a different take on that, and how can one kind of almost get financing anywhere in the world, and kind of use the bank? I mean, I think the cover of your book is How to Get Rich Bank Using Your Bank as Money or something.
Well, I was blessed in that I learned this early on, Scott. It's a great question, because I noticed that people didn't like going to the bank to ask for a mortgage. They applied for this whole attitude. So once I'd done it many, many times very successfully, I'd often get calls from friends and they said, hey, Dolf, would you mind coming with me? And I knew they didn't want to have me come with them on some exotic cruise or going to a fancy dinner. I said, oh, you're applying for a mortgage? Yes. So they were afraid of going to the bank. In fact, you wonder what are the biggest fears in the world? And you'd think the biggest fear in the world would be the fear of dying from some deathly disease or some horrible accident or something. No, the biggest fear in the world is the fear of public speaking. And the second biggest fear in the world is the fear of going to the bank to apply for a mortgage. Well, to understand how you should do it, and I know this will seem a bit arduous, but bear with me for a moment. When you have a mortgage being transacted, there's the mortgagee and the mortgagor. Now, when it comes to a lessee and a lessor, we all know which is which. The lessor is the landlord, and the lessee is the tenant who takes on the lease. I think you're all familiar with that, right? But when it comes to a mortgage, we think we go to a bank to get a mortgage. So when we get the mortgage, we're the mortgagee, and the bank gives us the mortgage, so they must be the mortgagor. And it seems natural. So we go to a bank to get a mortgage. But it's flat wrong, folks. The bank is the mortgagee, and you are the mortgagor. That's why if you're in default of your mortgage, what in America is called a foreclosure, and most of the rest of the world is called a mortgagee sale or mortgagee in possession. The bank as mortgagee has taken possession of the property to sell it so that they can get the money they advanced you back. So how can it be that the bank is the mortgagee? And it goes like this. You want to buy a property but don't have enough money, and the bank has lots of money but fortunately doesn't want to buy the property. Why do I say fortunately? Well, if they did want to buy the property, since they've got all the money, they could buy it all, but fortunately they don't want to. So you go to the bank and you basically say, listen, Mr. Bank Manager, I want to have this property, but I don't have the money. You have the money, but don't want the property. If you lend me the money to enable me to buy this property, I will give you a pledge that I will faithfully pay interest every month, and at some stage in the future, I'll pay back all the principal. You give the bank the pledge, the bank gives you the money. That pledge is called the mortgage. So you give the bank the mortgage. You don't go to a bank to ask for a mortgage. You go to a bank to give them a mortgage. So how does this work? One of the ways I describe that people should buy property, and I've covered it in courses and it's all over the internet, but I talk about a proposal for finance. This is a document that you create where you propose to the bank how this should work. And in the opening sentence, I've done this so often for decades now that I know it by heart. It starts, the very first paragraph of this proposal for finance document starts by saying a mortgage of 68,000 or whatever the number is, a mortgage of 68,000 is offered on a property located at such and such an address, representing X% of the purchase price of 100,000 and Y% of the registered valuation or appraisal of 120,000. But notice I say a mortgage is offered of X, not a mortgage is asked for or a mortgage is begged for, or I know, Mr. Bank Manager, that you probably won't consider me worthy of a mortgage, but I'm going to ask you anyway, but in expectation of your no answer, I'm going to walk towards the door already. I mean, that's how people do it. So you're offering them a mortgage. And then in this proposal for finance document, the next sentence says, collateral will be offered on the property being purchased by the very property that is being purchased. In other words, we're offering them a mortgage and we're offering them collateral. And it's one of these universal laws that if you offer someone else something often enough and frequently enough, eventually they'll offer you something. So I'm offering them a mortgage, I'm offering them collateral. Eventually they'll say, okay, here's the money. Now, you might think I'm exaggerating a little bit, and possibly I am a little bit, but this is how it works. If you go to a bank, cap in hand, apologizing for your very presence because you're not really worthy of a mortgage, asking, indeed begging for a mortgage, you are giving them every right to say no. But when you go there confident that you found a great deal, because indeed it is a great deal, and by the way, if it is not a great deal, you shouldn't be in that bank manager's office asking for money in the first place. So you know it's a good deal. And now, instead of asking for anything, you're offering him a mortgage and you're offering him collateral. That gives you a psychological power that almost no other applicant has, and chances are the bank is going to say yes.
So there's a good question here. Well, I don't know if it's relevant right now, but Jark said, why wealth migrate?
Okay, well, there's a segue. And listen, there are many levels I can answer that on. And you notice I don't even have to hesitate. Look, there are quite a few crowdfunding platforms out there already. I can't hide that fact because if you do a simple search, you'll find them. But here's the point of differentiation. One of the major reasons why I think why wealth migrate. And that is that almost without exception, all the other crowdfunding platforms are centric in one country. By that I mean they are licensed and certified and compliant to receive funds in one country, and they deploy them in that same country. To give an example, there'll be many crowdfunding platforms in the United States. They are licensed to collect money and solicit funds and collect funds from people in the United States, and then they invest in property in the United States. Wealth Migrate is one of the very few that is licensed and fully compliant in a variety of countries. We're looking at expanding it even further, but right now we can accept funds from any of a number of different countries, and we are currently actively involved in investing those funds in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, and other places. It's the only one that's global, and it's embedded in our name, folks. Some of you, if you haven't figured it out, we're talking about how you can migrate your wealth. In other words, you may not want to leave South Africa if that's where you are. You might be in Colombia, or you might be in Peru or Finland. You may not want to leave there, but you may feel that your money would be better invested in a first world market where there's higher capital growth. So you can migrate your wealth. Whether or not you want to migrate along with your wealth or at a later date or an earlier date, that's a separate issue. So we're one of the very few that is truly global. And as we said way at the beginning of this call, Scott, I think the world is getting more and more global. If you just look at the way it's changed in our own lifetimes, this trend is not only going to continue, it's going to accelerate. And I think that means Wealth Migrate will be extremely well poised to take advantage of this ongoing globalization.
It leads pretty well into the next question, which, between yourself and Henny, one of the things is that you've had the ability and, the privilege of partnering with some of the best people in the world. And, what is the key to partnering with the best? And I think, segue to the last question as to why Wealth Migrate. For me, it's, we always say to people that we believe we've got access to the best opportunities, but also the best partners. So what is the key to partnering with the best,
Oh gosh, this is so interesting, and I hope I'm not going to get too philosophical on you, even though it's a late hour here, but everyone wants to know how can they attract the best partner, be it a financial transaction partner or a friend or even a life partner or spouse. And the simplest way of thinking about it, the best way of attracting a really, really good partner is to be a good partner. What can you offer in return? Because it's one of those things, and we mentioned this on a number of occasions, it's something that I first learned from Zig Ziglar. and that is that you can get whatever you want in this world as long as you help enough other people get what they want. So, Scott, I gave you the example of turning this building roof into a helipad, and we turned $20 into $2 million, essentially overnight. And I've done that over and over again, not the helipad thing. I only did that on one roof on one building in the world, but I've had dozens and dozens of ideas. In fact, I've got a book out called 101 Ways to Massively Increase the Value of Your Real Estate Without Spending Much Money. So, given that I've got a background in changing the value of a building, maybe by changing its use or on converting something into something else that no one else had thought of, I can add massive value. So that is a skill that others now call me in for. They say, Dolf, would you mind looking at our portfolio? Is there anything you can do with it? And if I would do that consistently and I could never find anything, that would have petered out. But almost without exception, I'm tempted to say without exception, there probably were a few exceptions here and there, but almost without exception, Scott, we found ways of massively changing the value. So that means I become a valuable partner to these other people, and I now get sought out. So one of the best ways of attracting a great partner is to be a great partner. What can you offer? And it might just be that's a skill that's somewhat unique, but you might have other skills. You might be an artist, to name something at random, but because you can create this amazing art that might be suitable for a particular building, just create it for them, and you might hear nothing from them for 8 months, and then all of a sudden you'll get a commitment, and all of a sudden they say, well, do you want to be in on this deal? So you always think, what can you offer?
Yeah.
And it might just be money. Listen, this is why real estate is so much fun. Sometimes there are people who have no money. When I started out, I had no money. I didn't come from a background of money. I had zero money, but I had a lot of enthusiasm and it seems some good ideas. There are other people, they have zero enthusiasm. They don't want to get out of bed in the morning. They have zero desire to travel. They like watching soaps on TV, but they have oodles of money. So sometimes you can marry those two things. I'll never forget, Scott, and I know we probably have to keep moving, but I was doing an event. It was in Auckland, New Zealand a few years ago, and I had a woman come to me during the event, and she said, listen, I've been offered this house entirely free. They'll give it to me, but they have to remove it from the land, so they're willing to put it on a truck, but I have to know where to take the truck to, and I don't know what to do. It seems, what do I do? And I said, well, you're at an event of aspiring and eloquent real estate investors. Why don't you put it out to the group? So she did. After the break, she got up on stage and she said, listen, I've been offered this house. All I need to do is find a place to put it. Well, there was another woman in the audience, believe it or not, she'd just been bequeathed a piece of land from her dearly departed grandfather, and she didn't have anything on the land. It was costing her money. So naturally, they put the house on the land. They went into a partnership. So you can find a great partner by being a great partner. Let the world know what you have to offer, and you'll be stunned at how many people say, that's exactly what I want.
Yeah, no, that's a very good answer, actually. I'll remember that more myself as well. So the next question here is, you've trained with the best in the world, and there's also a massive change in training, with what's going on around the world. How can this benefit people that are on this group? And again, just to, you've done stuff with Robert Kiyosaki, Tony Robbins, Donald Trump. So what has kind of changed, from the old mindset of the way training used to work to where it's now going, particularly in the digital era?
Well, I've seen sort of 4 major changes, but we probably don't have time to delve into them, but I'll gloss over it a bit and say that, 15, 20 years ago, we used to do training by firstly people would get a book and they'd read the book, they'd get excited about it, and then they'd come along to an event. And I'm not talking about these upsells. I personally, folks, I can't stand these events where it's free to come in the room, but then they upsell you to a $200, Saturday event. And at the Saturday event, you have to go to the $3,000 weekend event, and at the weekend event, it's the $30,000 whatever training event. But it used to be that you'd come to a course and you'd have a bunch of 200-300 people who are genuinely interested in learning more about the subject matter, and you try and do a brain dump in that limited time you had for a weekend or something to get as much information across. But there's been a fundamental shift. Book sales have gone down around the world. I notice it in royalties. I used to be able to live off royalties, and now you could barely buy shoelaces from the royalties. It's because people aren't buying books. And the internet has fundamentally changed everything. The price of many things has come down. Even the price of courses has come down because a lot of pundits and self-appointed gurus think that they can get more clients by putting their erstwhile courses on the internet free of charge and all this. So it's neither good nor bad. It just is. So what's happening is there are now smarter ways of learning about what's going on in various parts of the world. And some companies just want to make money by selling information. And other companies, and I believe Wealth Migrate is one of these, we are so passionate about real estate. We're not a bunch of trainers who happen to think that real estate is the thing to train because there's money in it. No, we're passionate about real estate and we're willing to share the message. I think, you know, Scott, I'm doing this at some ungodly hour in the morning because I love it. I love real estate. And if we change even one mind to think about doing it where before they hadn't, you know, it's a great feeling because, you know, you've made a difference to that person. So it's fundamentally changing because now it's possible to do things online. And we at Wealth Migrate, we are spearheading a training program, which I think is unique. Because rather than it being a brain dump from someone who thinks they know into an audience of what they ought to learn, we are coming out with this program to people answer their questions that they have. And it's through the inner circle. We'll probably get onto it. But this is a program whereby fundamentally you ask questions and then we answer them for you. And believe it or not, you might think your question is unique, but we found over decades of doing this that the sort of question that Joe Blogg asks is generally the same as 100 other people ask from all different parts of the world. So if you listen to, you know, 50 or 60 or 100 or 200 of these questions being answered, chances are every question you ever had about real estate is answered as well. So there are two ways of doing it. One is the internet, even though it's caused a decline in the conventional way of training real estate, it's enabled something too, and now with videos and interactive things, it's become sort of a fun, enticing way to learn about real estate. And then there's another level. It was the fourth of those four I spoke of, and that is if you still want to get together. For instance, at Wealth Migrate, we take people on buyer's trips, and where you don't just learn over a gadget and a screen what's going on, but you can see it and touch it and feel it with your own eyes. And we find that really changes people because people believe us when they're on the training programs. But when you come on one of these buyer's trips, there's nothing like it. Suddenly you realize that it's real. And if you don't buy something soon, then you're missing out. Sure, you can buy next week or next month, but you'll be 1 month behind the person who's already bought. And you'll be cursing yourself, as I said earlier, that you didn't buy 5 years before.
Yeah, well, and the nice thing is with the digital buyer's trip now is that it's become an experience where you can almost do it from your phone or your laptop without even necessarily having to fly over. Look, It's not as good as being on the ground. Let's not beat around the bush.
Right.
But it's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing, yeah. So this is all changing, and we're rolling this out, and we're learning as we go. But it is a lot of fun, and it just, again, it enables a lot more people to be involved where before they couldn't.
Just a quick one here, and I think we've almost touched on it to an extent, but with technology, how can people be mentored by you? And I mean, you did mention it to an extent. You know, we've done quite a lot of work talking about the inner circle. You and I have actually been talking about it since our first webinar back in January. Right. And in many instances, we've already launched the inner circle. At the moment, we just we're effectively providing that value, you know, to people so that they can experience it, etc. But you know, the inner circle in many ways is that, as an example, when we buy a building, there's 4 different stages to actually buying a building: the research, the due diligence, the go no go stage, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, we believe a lot more in people learning by doing versus, you know, just again doing another course, et cetera. And you know, this whole kind of technology and mentoring, et cetera. So, you know, from your perspective, and now ironically, you've been doing this for 20 odd years, even with the discussions with Dolf, and basically using technology to share with people the knowledge that the real life practical knowledge that you're getting, and using technology to really get it out there. And what's exciting for me, I mean, even tonight, if you think about it, it's mentoring using technology, but kind of what are your thoughts on where this is going and how many more people can benefit from, you know, your knowledge and people like, you know, Henny's knowledge and other people that are on the team, you know?
Well, firstly, I don't know all the answers, and I have to temper my enthusiasm to teach with my enthusiasm to invest, because I could spend, you know, 168 hours a week teaching people, and then I wouldn't have a minute left to look at buying something. But I do have a passion for this, and I remember starting discussions with Dolf before we had those Amazon servers and all things in the cloud, before YouTube existed. In fact, in order to get video streamed, we used to send them out to 47 countries. We had clients in 47 countries. To stream them out, we had to build our own video streamers, video streaming service with our own software. And if people you know, were subscribed to this program, they'd get the video once a week. And that whole business was killed by the advent of YouTube. It's neither good nor bad, it just is. But we're using this technology now, this technology we're using right now to have all these people on the call. We can see how many, I'm astounded, by the way, at how many are on the call, so thank you all for being here. But this technology didn't exist a decade ago. You know, it's astounding how it's evolved. And the great thing is, with social proofing again, you can filter out the good from the bad. And if you don't like this, or if you don't like me in particular, that's okay. You can find other people that are a better fit you. And for some people, I speak way too fast, or I have way too much enthusiasm, or whatever. My mother can't follow me half the time. She says, "Why do you speak so fast? Slow it down."
That's probably why you and I get on well. We can talk fast, get lots of information over it.
Right. I'm reminded of a story, but we probably don't have time for that. But anyway, so it's all good. So, how can they be mentored by me? Well, I think the best thing to do is go to the Wealth Migrate website, wealthmigrate.com, and you'll figure out there how you can start to look at the inner circle videos. And we're formalizing that. We're going to get it more structured, but start to see what the format is. See if you like it. If there's a question you want answered that you haven't seen on whatever videos you've looked at, then pose the question. If you can't figure out how to get a question to us, you probably don't deserve to have it answered. That sounds a bit mean. It's not meant to be. But where there's a will, there's a way. And if we get enough interest in having these questions answered, I'm sure we'll create a little thing. If you want to ask a question to be answered potentially on Discussions with Dolf, type your question here and hit submit. But it's an interactive thing. We don't want to make it too easy in the initial stages. We want to know what you want. If you like this, then by all means, let us know you like it.
We're also doing on the, you and I did it last time where we did it on the Wealth Migrate Facebook page.
Right.
So people could put up questions there and then we could go in and answer it, kind of have that collaboration. Obviously, If they go to the portal now, it's got the online chat line. Now, obviously, you're not sitting behind the chat line answering that, but there's asset managers that can answer, between us collectively. The Discussions with Dolf thing is something that I think is really exciting because people can ask questions, we can film it, and then a lot of people can get access to those questions.
Right. Most of the ideas that I've deployed, some of them I've dreamed up myself, but most of them have been a variation on something that someone else had done. I always thought that if you want to increase the value of your property, you have to do things to your property like paint it and put flowers in and mow the lawns and all that standard stuff. But I learned from a person way smarter than I was that sometimes by painting the house next door, you can improve the value of your own property. You might say, well, why would you spend money on the neighbor's house? Well, if the neighbor's house is this derelict old cottage that's rotting away and it's dragging down the value of the whole street, why not spend $600 painting even just the front facade of it, if you like? And I'm not saying you should do that to all your neighbors' homes, but just think outside of the box. And it's by being exposed to other ideas that it's so valuable. In fact, I would say, Scott, singularly, one of the best things I've ever done to improve my real estate investing is to travel the world, because I've taken ideas from one part of the world that were used exclusively in that part of the world and deployed it somewhere else to great benefit.
Yeah, and to your credit, we've been traveling all around China now, and you've been taking pictures of all the different buildings and commenting on the interiors, and so I see that every single day. Just before I move off this poll here, I'd appreciate if people let people, just what it is. So an investor breakfast. We've actually got a great investor breakfast coming up around the country, the 6th to the 9th of June. I will be in Pretoria on the 6th. I'll be in Joburg on the 7th. I'll be in Durban on the 8th, and I'll be in Cape Town on the 9th. We've got the Inner Circle, which we've spoken about, which is going to be a digital online, literally monthly, opportunity to be able to get mentored, to be able to watch, to get the due diligence, to find out the best projects. We've got wealth dinners, which is what we do with our main kind of investors, etc., which is where we get together, it's going to happen that week. So on the Monday night, it'll be in Joburg. On the Tuesday night, it'll be in Durban. And on the Wednesday night, it'll be in Cape Town. And it's just really a get-together and a discussion. And then we've got the wealth weekend. We've actually got one coming up now on the 21st of May. It's just an afternoon and an evening with all our wealth partners. So, I love it. The energy is amazing and lots of conversations going. And for those who want to be a wealth partner, it's not available to everyone. It's by invite only. And generally, we've got a relationship with people already that've been on a buyer's trip. It's very, very exclusive. But it's an amazing community of people that are coming together. So, if people are interested in any of those things, go down to the survey and just click on it, and you'll actually be able to see just some of the different ways to interact with us. For us, it's all about giving back, but also about interaction. I love all these different frameworks and forums because it's as much about the digital world as about the real life world and getting together. And I know Michael Honeysett's online, so I'll always give him a shout out because we wouldn't have the breakfasts, the dinners, the weekends, or anything else if it wasn't for him. Came on a buyer's trip and he had so much fun, and he pretty much said to me, we've got to do all the follow-up stuff. So anyway, thanks, Michael, for everything. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll. I'm going to move on. There's so many questions coming through here. So I just want to finish this once. How can people invest with you? I think, in many ways, I think I'm always going to click on because with the whole kind of crowdfunding and the platform and everything, we're investing in all, the major deals, etc. And so, in the old days, you might have sold a book or a course and then they went off and did their own thing. Now you're actively involved. You're part of the investment committee. I mean, every single deal, you and Henny and Michiel, etc., are sitting on the investment committee. So, I mean, technically, people now have the opportunity to be investing in the same stuff.
Right, and just to add to that, Michiel often comes over to the States and other places as well, of course, and looks at deals. I sometimes meet with him in either Atlanta or Austin or Dallas. We have a great time. But Michiel is one of the, how would I describe it, Scott, one of the most solid analysts of real estate that I've ever come across. He's got this really lucid way of looking at it. It's just a pleasure and a delight to work with him. And, we also want you to know that we don't look at every property and figure out a way of putting lipstick on it to make it look good. The last time we were together in Atlanta, we had this major deal that we thought looked really good, but we analyzed it. There were some fundamental flaws with it, just minor things, but they were still sufficiently big that we didn't want to go ahead, and we canned the deal. So sometimes this is not a pleasant process because, we've spent weeks building up of expectation thinking it's going to be a great deal, and it's not. So when, you say, how do you invest with it? I'm sometimes there on the ground. I certainly am on the investment committee. We look at analyzing these properties. Again, that same process, Scott. What else can we do with this property to increase its value? It might be finding tenants for vacant space. It might be changing the use of the building. We even discussed a helipad. In one case, we had a cluster of medical buildings with a lot of vacant land. Well, sometimes medical facilities need emergency access by helicopter. So putting a helipad in on the ground is extraordinarily cheap. You can do it with a ring of white stones almost if you wanted to. Anyway, we're involved at all those steps on the way. So that is really almost a self-explanatory question. It is now possible to invest alongside me or you or any one of us in a way that wasn't even possible 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. And so just another one here quickly. I mean, I think how can we help people invest from $100? And something that's really exciting. And we did ask the question earlier what people wanted to invest in. We did a beta version launch two weeks ago, which I'll talk a little bit about, where people could go and they could sign up for the ability to pledge for $100. It's amazing. Actually, most people went for 1,000 or more, which is a good sign, just in terms of where it is. But, we really wanted to get the minimum amount down as much as possible. It's not necessarily public, but you can go online to wealthmigrate.com, register, and by random draw, 100 people are going to be allowed to go through the beta testing. I know that all our team and our wealth partners and everything have been given the option. And, we've been going through that beta testing. We're looking to bring that up to the market as soon as possible. And you think how exciting that is. You can dazzle your friends, your family, your colleagues, investing in first world opportunities alongside millionaires and billionaires, getting the same relative returns and ultimately being able to do it with $100. It's pretty exciting. In terms of just how to get the 30 videos from Dolf, he's been doing these discussions with Dolf. I mean, I was here with him in Beijing just 2 days ago, and he was off in the Forbidden City doing it. So you're getting them from all over the world, which is actually really cool. And learning all these different things, and we've had all these questions coming through, and these 30 videos, and I'm going to explain just now how you can actually get access to those 30 videos. So my last question for tonight, and then there are quite a few coming through, so we'll get to that. I'll just finish off and we can go through some of the questions. But what is your prediction on where real estate's going in the next 10 years? It's again quite a loaded, wide question, but what's your kind of opinion on terms of some of the trends?
Well, this is sort of left field, but I've got two thoughts that come to mind. One is I think building materials are going to go way more high tech. I'm involved with an inventor out of all things, and I don't know why I attract these people, but it's probably because he's invented something that's useful for the real estate industry, and that is he's got a paint additive. This is a powder you add to a conventional pail of paint, and it reflects an astounding 99% of the 5 forms of radiation that fall on a building. You've got of heat. You've got radiative heat, reflective heat, conductive heat, infrared, and there's one more. So it reduces the heat load on a building, which means your air conditioning plant only has to run for a shorter period of time each cycle to have the same effectiveness. We've got another compound that was originally developed by DuPont, but has since been modified a lot, that you add to the refrigerant in an air conditioning plant, only 5% by volume of the refrigerant, and it improves the efficiency of it so that you draw 11% less electricity. We've now got windows that have a better heat resistance in the glass themselves, plus if they're dual paned or even triple paned, etc., etc. I think you get the drift. So one is technology. We're changing the technology in new buildings, and it's going to cause massive changes in what is a popular A-grade building and what isn't. The second trend that I see coming through is these millennials, and I wish we were part of that group, but unfortunately, the relentless march of time prevents that. But they are less inclined to own things. They don't own cars. There's a generation of young people coming through that don't have driver's licenses because they don't need them. They get Ubers all the time, or they have some other form of pooled driving. And by analogy, they also don't want to own property. The dream of everyone in my generation was that at some stage you buy a home. Well, that dream has sort of disappeared. They say, why? We're traveling. We're going to spend 6 months here, a year there, then traveling. We don't want to own. We don't want the burden of having to fix the sewage pipe when it bursts or something. Let someone else take care of that. So you might think, well, that's bad, so real estate's going out of fashion. No, the demand for landlords is going to go up. And they're going to rent from someone. It may as well be us. So there are two out of left field sort of predictions as to what might change in the real estate industry.
Yeah, no, one last that I just wanted to mention that I learned from Peter Diamantes when we were at Abundance 360 is that, the greatest opportunity in the space with where this technology is going is that wherever there's excess capacity, there's opportunity. So if you think about it from a cars perspective, there was excess cars with, and now we've got Uber. If you think about it from Airbnb, there was excess rooms, and now we've got Airbnb. And ironically, the head of product development for Uber stood up and he said, well, there's excess capacity, and with really fast transport, we even went on that bullet train as an example, but even at much faster speeds, land that's in Tanzania or down in Mexico or Neisner, by the way, it suddenly becomes practical to be able to get to and from work a lot more. So it's just an interesting, mindset of looking at it. So in terms of where we're at. So let's just run through a couple of things here before we get on to.
It's one of the most reliable and profitable.
Sorry, so I just want to show you some stuff here to back that up, because I think this is one of the biggest predictions in terms of where things are going. And then we've got a number of questions, but I just want to finish off and just show some people some stuff, and then we'll answer the questions. But for those of you that are watching the clock, let me get finished here, and then we can answer the questions.
Real estate. It's one of the most reliable and profitable investments in the world. 49% of the world's wealth is held in real estate. It's what built the wealth of kings and aristocrats. But investing in real estate for the average person is simply out of reach. It's a playground normally reserved for millionaires or billionaires. Only the top 0.1% of people own and invest in commercial real estate. There's a wealth gap across the globe that's pricing out the middle class from investing in one of the best ways to build and preserve wealth, which will enable them to give their children a better future. Studies prove that children who grow up in households who have stable financial futures do better in life. That's a fact. But too many people don't have access to it. We want to change that. Let's open up the opportunity to people who work hard, manage their finances wisely, and need a place to invest for their family's future. What we're doing at Wealth Migrate is exactly that. It's simple, but incredibly powerful. We're eliminating the typical barriers to entry when investing in real estate, whether that's knowledge, money, experience, or access. Access to what the top investors know and are able to invest in, but that you can't. We're giving people the opportunity to invest globally in commercial real estate through the internet, right alongside high-profile investors, and earn the same returns and monthly dividends. We're using the internet and our technology to give everyone access to real estate investment opportunities you've never had access to before. By giving you access to global real estate investing, our goal is to empower 1 billion people by 2020 and close the wealth gap that currently exists. It's one we know we can achieve through something we already know works: crowdfunding. By using crowdfunding to fund real estate projects, you don't need to invest huge amounts of money to become a part owner of a project. It levels the playing field and helps developers start new projects. It's a win-win for everyone, and our experience is second to none. Clients have trusted us to facilitate investments of over $1.34 billion on 5 continents over 3 decades. We've published 19 books, including New York Times bestsellers. And then there's our technology, our secret sauce that helps you make smart investments. Now it's your time to grab this opportunity. Do it now with our trusted, secure real estate investment platform. Visit www.wealthmigrate.com to see what amazing opportunities are available right now.
So just quickly in terms of, what's been happening around the world, and I think that video shows it, is that it's really difficult to invest in this type of thing. And, a lot of people want to invest internationally, but they don't know how to get out of the country. They don't know how to get past the barriers to entry. They don't know about the tax, the banking, the structures, the compliance, how to deal with different partners or language, which, as you said, we went on the wrong tube today. So that's pretty standard for, what we're dealing with. I think also, the old real estate system is broken. If you take the investor to the investment, there's actually 16 different middlemen between the investor and the investment. There's much leakage in terms of fees. There's no trust, there's no transparency, and there's certainly no alignment because all the middlemen and the brokers are actually making the majority of the return on the investment. And when you add that and the ability and the difficulty to investing overseas, it becomes really difficult. And that's one of our passions, to provide people with those solutions. And that's why we've got a global solution where we put, in multiple different jurisdictions to enable people primarily from the emerging world to invest in further markets of America, England, and Australia. I think Dolf went into this, and I'm not going to explain a huge amount about it tonight, but we use our GIT system, which is our global investment due diligence system. It's a very advanced, system that's been built over many decades with a huge amount of experience to understand, which countries to invest in based on currency and scenario planning. It's a lot to do with Clem Santa. I actually wrote my book and got it endorsed by him based on the 4-dimensional model that we built on top of his scenario planning. There's the, how do you find the right partners? How do you set it up in the right structures? Which city do you invest in? It involves Dolf's system of REAP and REMS, which has been around for many years. There's the pre-diligence due diligence checklist, which, you've spoken of, et cetera. So, again, I went into this in quite a lot of detail last week, and I know someone actually asked about gearing. Please go and watch last week's webinar, which was how to get started, how to buy a house, how to become an investor, where I went into a lot of detail to explain some of the systems, basically. This just gives you a quick overview of REAP. Just a matter of interest, for the people online tonight, who would like a full training by Dolf on REAP? He has offered to possibly, well, certainly for our internal team and for our wealth partners, but maybe just for the people online and people that want to do in a circle, we might actually do it. So if you type in there in a circle, this is the type of functionality and stuff that we'll be sharing with people, right, within the inner circle, basically. Okay, so just in conclusion, our platform is pretty simple. You can go online, you get verified, you can select the investment, you can transact online. And the part I love most is you can manage all your investments because, having properties around in different areas, I battle to read all my emails and keep up with everything. And the nice thing is that now I can consolidate everything into one place. And in terms of what we're on, you've got global dashboards, and really you can look to manage it. Now, is it perfect? Is it exactly where we want it to be? No, the vision is really large, and from a technology point of view, we want it to be completely seamless and be able to do everything off your mobile and run your entire life off your entire investment portfolio. It's not quite there yet, but it's certainly a global first in terms of having a digital exchange. And then, I think something that differentiates us dramatically between ourselves and many others is the team. Most of you will know many of these people between Henny and Hilda and Ling here in China. Dolf's the one that's been presenting tonight and has huge experience, as you know, but Roger Hamilton and Jakob Moritz on the CIO and Lo on the CFO and numerous other people on the digital, the compliance. Joy Scoffler is one of the most respected people in crowdfunding in America. Paul Nadira is one of the top 5 in the world. And many of the team are critically important. You mentioned Michiel earlier. Kevin, who's helping us run this tonight. Yanni is incredibly important in the after sales, and many other people that are really important. This is not Dolf show or the Scott show. There's many other people that are critical to providing the service that we look for. And that really allowed us, to launch this beta version that we did on Freedom Day. Nelson Mandela, it's the day that we had our first free and fair elections. We like to joke with everyone that it's Economic Freedom Day. And all that you need to do is go on the portal and register. To do that, you'll get access to our 3 different white papers. So the first one's for a beginner, what you need to know to effectively get wealth out of real estate. The intermediate, the 5 things you need to know about offshore real estate investment. And then the advanced, which is how to create a global portfolio. If you do, you'll also get a copy to my ebook, which is Property Going Global. They do have me writing version 2. I'd rather run Comrades back to back all over again. The videos with Dolf, like we said, we'll be drip feeding those out as they're getting, done all the way through. And then really, it allows you the opportunity to, not necessarily today, not everyone will have the opportunity to invest from $100, but you certainly go in the draw. 100 people will be allowed to. Obviously, our existing clients will get access to that first, and our partners. You can actually invest from a minimum of $10,000, so both in residential and commercial. I know someone asked about the 10-house package. That's where we buy 10 houses, and you can invest. So rather than investing in one house, you can invest across 10 houses in areas like Dallas or Atlanta, Memphis, just to give you an example. And then for the more sophisticated investors with 50 or above, you can actually deal with the asset managers that can help you really create portfolios and long-term wealth, and really about the whole plan. And then in terms of just some webinars, we've got some great webinars coming up in the next 3 weeks. We've got Garth Wellman. I can never remember if Garth's next week or Roger Hamilton's next week, so if someone can just give me some feedback there. But Roger Hamilton is one of the global experts on exponential thinking and how to take businesses global. And Garth Wellman is, ultimately a family office that looks after some of the wealthiest families in South Africa, and will be teaching people about how to do structuring, tax, and some of the big trends that he's seeing in terms of the wealthiest people in South Africa and what they're actually doing. So I don't know if you guys can just type or tell me which one's first. And then I know we're also finishing off with Hilda Landestedt, who's one of our partners and one of the most successful women, in South Africa from a business perspective and internationally. She's been recognized by many, many different publications. And I thought it would be awesome to finish off with a lady who's not only been very successful in her own right, but is also recognized around the world, and actually just been invited by Virgin Unite, which is the Richard Branson charity, to really champion empowering women and women in business, etc. So we'll be finishing with her and her thoughts on women and investment and empowerment, and also some of the challenges that women face in the current space. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that'll be awesome as well. Then I mentioned to you the breakfasts. So those are the dates. You can see them there. So don't say that you didn't know about it. If you go on our website, you'll get them, and we'll also send through the details. If you're interested in the breakfast, just type in there breakfast. We can make sure that you get it. But do type in breakfast Joburg, breakfast Durban, breakfast Cape Town, so we know where you want to go. The Wealth Partners dinner are by invite only. If you do put in there the dinner, we'll obviously have one of our asset managers phone you and have a chat with you. Generally, it's for current, either wealth partners or current significant investors. And then lastly, to finish off with our vision, most people don't know what a family office is. It's not just in South Africa or China or elsewhere, but really wherever you go in the world and you talk to the wealthiest people in the world, everyone who's wealthy knows what a family office is, because they look after the wealthiest people in the world. And effectively, there's only 2 things they do. They scour the world for good investment opportunities and all the research, and then they understand you and your family and bespokely what you're trying to achieve, and they help you marry the 2 together. And our vision really is, from a technology point of view, is why can we not put a family office in every single person's pocket? Really, when you think about it, with the power of technology, the power of mobile phones, why can't we do profiling on individuals and help them create their future in terms of what they want to do, where they want to do it, and when they want to do it, and then ultimately, from an investment perspective, marry the 2 together and help people ultimately create the future that they want. Richard Dunnett's a beautiful saying yesterday, help people create dreams. Maybe that's what we're doing. We're creating dreams for people. We're helping them create dreams. So I really enjoy that. And so just in conclusion, and then I'll answer some of these questions, but, speak to an asset manager, come to one of the breakfasts. I'm really excited. I haven't done a breakfast this year, so I'll be part of those breakfasts, and our asset managers and some of our wonderful team will be sharing. And for those of you who've been to a breakfast, my promise to you is that it'll be completely unique. We're actually going to be asking, and if you've got any ideas of what you want for the breakfast, tell me. But I will prepare something completely unique. So whatever you've been and seen at a breakfast, you won't see again. So this will be a very unique breakfast. Go online to the portal, so wealthmigrate.com. If you're in China, it's wealthmigratechina.com if you can read Mandarin or speak Mandarin, but then I presume you wouldn't have been on this webinar. And if you want to sign a mandate, we do the buyers trips. We can either sign mandates or do digital buyers trips. start your journey to investing globally. You know, I truly believe that, you know, where we're here in China, the money here is just absolutely astounding. But I think really it's how global they think. And, you know, a lot of South Africans are starting to think globally and other people around the world, and it will give them an opportunity. So let's fire through some of these questions. And I'm just going to put up there Jason's details and a number. If you want to, you can SMS. That's an SMS line. If you want someone to get back to you, you can just type in their asset manager, or even, you know, send Jason an email, and he'll get someone to help you out. And, you know, for those of you on the recording afterwards, as you know, unfortunately, you don't get to ask questions. That's why you should come live. But, you know, obviously you can use those contact details to get back to us. So Bob here said, how can I use gearing to ensure that you can use real estate works for you? Bob, in the essence of time, please watch last week's webinar. I spent a whole large amount of time on leveraging, gearing, the benefits of it and the downside of it, and how you manage that risk. So I'd highly recommend for the beginners that are on this call to go and watch last week's webinar on how to buy a house and all the pros and cons that you need to know. Jenny said, how can one meet with your asset managers to find out more about your current properties that you have available? So again, you can just type in your asset manager. You can go online and literally talk to them live in the live chat. I'm not sure if they're available at 7 or 8 p.m. at night. I know for a fact in Shanghai they're not available at 2 a.m. in the morning at night, but certainly they'll be online tomorrow. Or you can send an email or SMS in terms of where that is. So Paula said, if I don't have a retirement policy as yet, would you recommend investing in a retirement plan option? I think Dolf and I are pretty similar on this. I don't know if you want to answer that one.
Well, I'd say yes. I mean, you don't say how old you are. You could be 15 years old without a retirement package, or 65. But either way, I still think that real estate offers some of the best opportunities for doing well of all the investment vehicles out there. You know, obviously, if you're 75 years old, you're still working, looking at retiring next year, then you may not have that much runway left for capital growth. Or if there's a downturn in the market the way we experienced in 2008, then it might take a while for that to recover. But in general, absolutely. I think real estate is so much better than other forms of investment. I think even if you don't yet have a retirement policy, I would definitely recommend investing in real estate.
Yeah, I think just from my side, you know, I've watched people a bit like what Dolf said, watch people, and 49% of the world's wealth is held in real estate. Mm-hmm. I think the only people who get wealthy from retirement policies are the people that actually sell the retirement policies and the companies that offer them. So, right. You know, whereas like, I mean, you've given the stats all night about real estate, and, you know, my philosophy is, if you really want to know it, is that business is a way to create value quickly, and real estate is a way to build long-term wealth and to preserve wealth. You know, right. And again, I'm not talking from my experience. I'm talking from all the really, really wealthy people I've had the privilege of dealing with and working with. Okay, the 10-house package we've just explained. I'm quite sure. You said, what is the typical TER in property crowdfunding? I don't know if you mean IRR. So I'm just going to presume you mean IRR. And if that's the case, we tend to aim for a return for the investors in the region of kind of 13 to 15%. From an IRR perspective. That's after all fees, and there's very few fees anyway, but the bottom line is that's a net, you know, in the investor's pocket. Why can't we select, hang on, what just happened there? Why can't we select multiple things on the poll? Great question, Francis. I don't know. We'll have to set that up better so that you can if you want to. It is unwise to cash in a pension, pay the tax, and invest in higher value of property by leveraging the bank's money. Is it unwise to cash in a pension, pay the tax, and invest in a higher value of property by leveraging the bank's money?
Scott, I don't think we can answer that. We'd need to know the value of the pension relative to other assets. We need to know the age of the person. We need to know what the state of the market is. I might feel uncomfortable just giving a blanket answer. Someone acts on that, and then if we'd had more details, we'd say, well, with the benefit of hindsight, we should do it this way.
Yeah. But we're not financial advisors. I forgot to say that earlier.
No, well,
we offer no financial advice. That's the legal letter that we were supposed to say.
And past results may not be indicative of future results. But having said that, in general, I think if you have someone who invests in real estate and someone else who doesn't, then 40, 50 years down the track when they're ready for retirement, usually the one that invested in real estate is in a better position.
Yeah, and I mean, I would read the first chapter of my book if you want to know why I so passionately believe in that. My father had a pension. He didn't cash it in, unfortunately, he passed away, and It started at 500,000 rand, and when he died 10 years later, my mother was paid 480,000 rand, which is a phenomenal return. And I guarantee you that the broker that sold him the package and the bank, the financial institution that offered it, they all made money, but he made no money.
Yeah.
And I showed actually my mother how she could have bought 4 houses at a 40% loan to value, which is really low in risk. And today, 20 years later, funny enough, because it was 20 years ago, she would have many, many millions in terms of net asset value, and ironically more than 2 million rand a year in cash flow. So, and it's not even difficult. It was based on the long-term mortgages. I'm applying for a mortgage. The average loan is 20 years, which is fine if you take my affordability into perspective, but I would like to know what I can do to reduce the repayment term from 20 years to 5 years.
Oh gosh, that's a question with a hook, because really you should be looking at how you can make the payment period longer, not shorter. And the reason is that when you pay back principal, it is not tax deductible. So, what are you going to do when you've paid off the mortgage in 5 years? You're probably going to take the money and buy another property. Well, instead of paying the mortgage off and then using the money that you've paid off essentially to buy another property, why not just keep a long-term mortgage? One of the things I love in the States is you can get 30-year loans and even 40-year loans, and better than that is just go interest only. I have no desire to pay a mortgage off. If I have $100,000 of cash that I could use to pay one mortgage off, I'd rather deploy that cash by buying another property, maybe $1 million property with that 100,000 cash and a $900,000 mortgage. I know that sounds wrong for some people. Some people don't sleep at night if they have too much debt. I don't sleep at night if I have too little debt. There are just many sound financial reasons why you shouldn't try to pay it off too quickly. So I'd need to know the age of the person and their motivation and their other circumstances. What other income do they have? What other assets do they have? What tax bracket are they in? But in general, I wouldn't be in a hurry to pay off a mortgage. You can far better use that capital to do other things with.
Yeah. No, very much so. And I thought, and again, Bernice, I'd highly recommend you join the inner circle as an example, because it's really a fundamental understanding, and again, the difference between kind of a wealthy mindset, in terms of the long term.
Right.
Do you think, since population growth is correlated with property opportunity, that Kinshasa and Lagos are good investment opportunities? You're not the best guy to answer that question, but no, I don't mean it in a good way. I mean it because of your experience when you went there. But
yeah, well, I've been to these places, and so I can speak with a little bit of authority from them. And they are wild. And one of the things you need, it's not just whether there's population growth. You also need rule of law. And, that's not the only other thing. Gosh, the rule of law in Lagos, listen, it might come round. I know that Nigeria is now the #1 economy in Africa. It surpassed South Africa about 2 or 3 years ago. And there's a lot of wealth there. There's a lot of oil wealth there. There's a lot of great ideas. We tend to think in the United States anyway, as Nigeria being a source of dodgy emails. But the fact that these emails still persist means that there are enough suckers who buy into them and think they must have been selected as the friend of the late whoever, who passed away and who's got 328 million in a bank in Switzerland. And if only they'd pay the $5,000 clearance fee, they can get the money. There's more to Nigeria than that. But for me, I'm not actively looking at investing there, because despite the population growth, they've got a rule of law issue that I don't even feel particularly comfortable going there. And Port Harcourt is worse than Lagos in my view. But in general, yes, there's a very strong correlation. Just follow that and you won't go wrong. But I'd stick to mainstream places, I'm sorry to say.
Okay, then which African countries besides South Africa present good property investment? Is Wild Migrate looking at any African opportunities? So just quickly from my side, we have actually been looking into Africa, and Henny has been looking specifically in the medical space at quite a lot of opportunities. But it almost goes to say, watch the space. We're in China right now. It's nearly 3 a.m. in the morning, and Dolf and I need to get to bed, to be perfectly honest. But, India is of fascination to me, and certainly Africa. And I always joke with people, if we focus on China, India, and Africa, they'll keep us busy for the next 30 years in terms of opportunities. But, yes, definitely, Ronald, the intention is to be in Africa. On the financing part, as explained by Dolf, do you do it in your own currency or country, or do you get it from another part of the world? And where will the best country be to get these financing for property?
Well, there's one rule that I really have to jump in here and make very clear. You never, ever, ever borrow money in one country to deploy in another country, especially if it's got a different currency. because then you stand to wear the exchange rate risk. So if you're buying a property in Belgium, I'm not suggesting you should, but if you were to buy a property in Belgium, you should absolutely borrow in Belgium. You know, I guess you could now argue, well, could you borrow in euros? But certainly, if you're a South African, you want to buy something in America, you don't borrow money in France to invest in America. Apart from the fact that I don't think you'd find a single bank in France that would lend money on a property in America, because there's a matter of enforcement. If you do go into a situation where you're in default of the mortgage, how would a bank from another country enforce it? How would they instigate the foreclosure or mortgagee, or what do you call it, redemption proceedings? And apart from that, though, you don't want to take that risk. I know it can work in your favor, but it can also work against you. So always, always, always borrow locally.
Yeah, I must admit, I learned that a long time ago, where guys in South Africa were like, you know, they were in London working. They were like, oh, I can borrow cheaply in London. I can take the money home and buy South African property. And then not only did the rand devalue, but, you know, yeah, anyway, property prices didn't do so well either. And the point being is now you've got a pound mortgage where you've got not much of an asset.
Right.
Okay. One of the ladies in the team said that Discussions with Dolf is on YouTube and Facebook, so they can go find it. I suggest you go to the Wealth Migrate Facebook page. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. Is a REIT a form of crowdfunding? Good question, Ronald. In our case, no. So it's direct property investing. We help people through technology invest in direct property investing. There are some forms of e-REITs coming available, but we believe that there's a real value in investing in direct real estate and not necessarily having a blended return. That's not saying we won't do it in the future, but we'll always have direct property investing because there's a significant advantage to that as well. Okay, so I can see here that there's a lot of questions. Then what does the investor hurdle rate mean in the medical prospectus? So Costa, what that means is that most companies take all their money on the front side. It means that the brokers make all the money on the front side, and whether or not you make money is tough. They've already made their money. In our situation, we have a hurdle rate, which means that we only benefit after you've benefited. So we only make money on the once the investor's made money. And so the investor hurdle rate is that if we say there's an 8% hurdle rate, then you as the investor get the first 8%. To be fair, me, when I put my money in and I put my money into Medical 5, I also get the investor hurdle rate, and then we share in the upside with the investor. So it's effectively a performance, fee, if you want to call it that, but only after the investor's made money. So it's the guaranteed return. But just do a Google search for that. Hurdle rate will be well explained on it. So I can see there's different people for the breakfasts and the dinners. Portuguese breakfast. Okay.
Which city is known as Portuguese?
Well, I think we'll go to Portugal. I'll go to the Algarve. We'll do a breakfast in the Algarve if people are keen. How does Wealth Migrate make its money or fees? So, Costa, from our side is that there's a flat due diligence cost right up front. It's not a percentage. It's based on the cost to be able to do the due diligence. So it's a transparent cost up front. And then, like I've just explained, there's a performance fee on the back end. So that's primarily how it works, basically. Okay, Anna Marie said, I'm 65, need income from investment. What would you suggest? I was interested in the medical option, or should I split into various options with Wealth Migrate? Anna Marie, just from my side, before Dolf answers that, I want to maintain we're not financial advisors, and there's a lot of things you need to take into account about people's personal situation, etc., etc. We're really good at helping people invest in good quality assets with good quality partners. We're not necessarily financial planners to take everything into account, but I do know one thing, that the medical options that Henny and Michiel are finding in America are very strong income generating assets and pretty robust in terms of market corrections, and even if the market corrected, people still need doctors. Doctors tend to sign long leases, and also they sign pretty favorable leases. So it does provide an income, but also be aware that it pays it quarterly. So these are things that you need to take into account. But I think we probably should go into a lot more detail around that. I know you've been speaking to some of the team members, but let us know if we can help. Is a hurdle rate a guarantee of the minimum rate that an investor will get? So nothing's a guarantee in investing. Like, we don't guarantee it. If we did, we'd be charging all these fees that you wouldn't know about, because somehow we'd have to justify the guarantee. But we do believe that from a guarantee perspective, there's a cash-on-cash return, which is based on the actual rentals the buildings are earning right at the moment. But it does give you a minimum, criteria. Below that hurdle rate, we don't get anything. So it's in our best interest not to just do deals for the sake of doing deals. So it's certainly, at the absolute minimum. I mean, we wouldn't do anything. There's no point in doing a business to make no money. Well, basically, you go bankrupt if you do that. So, it just gives people an indication. Okay, so I think we're coming to the end of the questions here, and I'm pretty tired. My voice is getting pretty hoarse, and it's 2:45 a.m. in the morning Shanghai time. So if there's no more questions, I'm going to call it a day. I'll give it another 30 seconds or so. I'm not sure, Dolf, from your perspective, I would like to thank you very much. It's a little bit more than commitment, I think, to ask you to stay up all night and to do a webinar at 1 a.m. and then answer all these different questions. And again, thank you very much for your enthusiasm in answering it. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. And listen, we're here at the office still because the internet is so bad. You talk about the Great Wall of China. It's real, but there's also a Great Firewall of China. And so it's hard to get information in or out of the country at times. So we're here at the office. So even though it's nearly 3 a.m. here, we still have to make our way home to where we're staying. And that's 2 tube rides away, 2 subway rides away, or a taxi. But I don't know if we'll manage to get a cab at this hour of the night. We'll see. We might end up walking home.
In the rain.
We have to be up at 7 again because we've got meetings first thing in the morning. So, but it's all part of the game. When we always say that when you are passionate about what you do, when you catch fire with enthusiasm, people come from miles around to watch you burn. And I would way sooner be passionate about something than be indifferent, because so many people lead lives of indifference that is just, it's horrid. I couldn't imagine it. So at least we get the pleasure of waking up excited about what we're going to do every day. And when you get to hang with people like that, and they all manifest it in a different way, but I know Michiel, for instance, that I mentioned before, and Jaco and some of the others on the team, they are so enthused about doing what we do. It's just a pleasure to work with them. It makes life fun.
Yeah, so I think on that note, I wanted to say thanks to all the team members who are online. Everyone's made an effort to come online tonight, which is great, and hopefully learn some stuff. Kevin, thanks for organizing and setting it all up. Really, really appreciate it. Without you running it and making it run all smoothly and getting it all set up for us, these things would not be able to take place. And to everyone who's online tonight, there's still a huge amount of you that are online nearly 2 hours later. So thank you to all of you. Without you, there's no point in us sharing, and we can't get excited and stay up all night and share some of our knowledge. So,
right.
So thank you to everyone online. And for those of you listening to the recording, maybe next time you might want to come along live and be able to ask your own questions. So thanks to everyone. I think that's enough for tonight. Go to the Facebook site, Wealth Migrate page, and you can ask questions, or go to the website, wealthmigrate.com. You can chat there and ask questions. And thanks very much, everyone. I think that's enough for one evening. Good night.
Thank you all. Good night.